When Resident Evil 7 launched back in January of last year, it was lauded as a return to form for the long-time running series. It brought back the white knuckle tension, scares, and careful gameplay, the things that the original games are known for. I loved this game when it first launched, and as a guy who's known for his love of the series, I agreed with what most people said about the experience. I probably played through the PS4 version around 8 or 9 times until I eventually wasted my money and bought the PC version as well. So you can tell that I really like this game. However, now that a full year has passed and all of the DLC is released, I think we have to take a step back and realize the scope of what Capcom was attempting to pull off here. It seems as though that Capcom had some bigger ambitions with the DLC, and what they were trying to do was to reach an audience they may have alienated with the base game. To see what I'm talking about, we have to break the mainline Resident Evil series into 2 parts. You have the classic Resident Evil experience with set camera angles, tank controls, and an emphasis on survival. This is represented with Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica. I guess you can add 0 into this too. From there, a shift occurred to a more traditional third-person action game. Games like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 moved the camera to behind the shoulder and had the horror elements take a backseat to the action. The change was gradual, as Resident Evil 4 still had somewhat of a grasp of where it came from, but by the time 6 came around, we were in full-on Michael Bay territory. Most Resident Evil fans would say that this is where the series dropped off for them. This is where the series got bad. It wasn't Resident Evil anymore. Just slap a new title on it and it's a fine game, but because it shares the same name of the older classics, we just can't accept it. Here's the thing though. 5 and 6 are the best-selling games in the franchise, and it's not even close. As much as a traditional Resident Evil fan wants to complain about those entries, and trust me, there was plenty to complain about, they had the most widespread success of any game in the series. Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 combined sales were approximately 26 million units. Compare this to Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, Code Veronica 0 at almost 24 million copies. And this is including the HD remasters of 1 and 0. So 7 games in the mainline series couldn't match up to the last 3 released. They were more accessible. The horror survival genre was still very niche compared to the more bombastic action titles, and this was a time that co-op games were in. Most games around the time of 2009 to 2012 had some form of cooperative play, and these were no exception. Hell, Resident Evil 5 I consider to be one of the best co-op experiences on the last generation. As long as you have a partner that can hit the quick time events. It's hard to blame a company to take a look at the metrics and continue with the trend that they were seeing. The faster pace, action, set-piece based games were moving copies, and the Resident Evil that we knew from yesteryear is probably gone forever. Capcom, to their credit, listened to the fans and decided not to keep pushing after 6. We did get 2 more spin-offs in the Revelation series, but the main series went ghost for about 5 years. And then, almost out of nowhere, we retreated to a sort of underground approach as details of Resident Evil trickled out slowly. We first saw the kitchen tech demo in 2015, and this was mainly here as a demo to show off the potential of Project Morpheus, or PlayStation VR as we now know it. However, this gave us a first taste as to what to expect from Resident Evil going forward. This experience felt personal. The scope was more narrow. We were given a small scene of terror as this unknown woman not only kills your friend, but terrorizes you as well. There were no explosions or chase scenes or tens of enemies in front of you. Just you and the monster in the dark. Almost another full year went by until E3 of 2016, where Resident Evil 7 was officially announced with an early 2017 release. And not long after that, the beginning hour demo was released. This was a short demo that was meant to act as sort of a prologue for what was to come, and to show the world that Resident Evil has taken another major shift in direction and tone. Camera is now first person, movement is slower and methodical again. There's a re-emphasis on pacing and item management. The details in the environment are grittier and kind of gross. There's going to be puzzle solving again, and it was a welcome take, and on a personal level, made me incredibly excited for the final release. The best thing they did, however, were the incremental updates they provided for the demo. Titled Twilight version and Midnight version respectively, these minor updates added more context to what you will be up against. New items, new clues, new environments, changed environments, new ending possibilities. all of these providing hints as to what to expect from the final product. It was a fantastic approach to get people excited about Resident Evil again, or at the very least, get the fans of the original games back into it. So, January 2017 rolls around, and it's finally here. So, after a killer marketing campaign that showed great promise as to what's to come, how did it fare? Was it actually good? Is it worth your time and money? From my view, fucking excellent. It remembered what made the series so engaging and fun in the first place, while injecting some new life into its cold, dead veins. I don't really want to talk about the story so much as it doesn't really pertain to the topic at hand. I mainly want to talk about the execution of the gameplay, and I think it'll be a little easier to digest this if we break it up into two parts. Number 1, remembering where we came from. Number 2, where we need to go. To a returning Resident Evil veteran, at first glance, it may seem like that this is another big departure. You may play the first 20 minutes or so and say, yeah, I don't feel like this really fits into what the original Resident Evils were doing, or this definitely also does not feel like it's directed by Michael Bay, so we should, this is kind of like its own trilogy. Like, this is episode 7. It's episode 7. I would agree with you for the most part that at first glance, it seems like that this is nothing that Resident Evil has ever provided to me before. But let's look at it a little closer. Let's put this game side by side with some of the originals. What makes the original Resident Evil game so great? Let's get the obvious stuff out of the way.
Number 1, limited supplies and item management.
Yep, both of these games have them. We've got limited storage on our player characters, and higher difficulties mean less ammunition and healing, and connecting item boxes to help you manage as you progress through the game.
Number 2, an arsenal of weapons.
Yeah, most definitely. Much like the originals, Resident Evil 7 has a clear progression of weaponry. You get better stuff as the game gets better stuff to throw at you.
Number 3, puzzle solving.
While it doesn't reach the creative heights of the first few Resident Evil games, it has them, I guess. This one's a little more of a stretch, but puzzles do exist in the game, so it counts. I mean, look how hard it is to line up this shadow. Sometimes it's going to take you a few minutes, so don't get discouraged and be Okay, you got it.
Number 4, map layout.
So we go through a mansion, and then a guardhouse, and then back to the mansion again, then underground that eventually leads us to a secret lab that was hidden in plain sight. Oh my god, we've done this before, haven't we?
Number 5, save rooms.
You ever just have a positive feeling that's immediately triggered by something as so simple as hearing some tones that mean safety? I don't know. I miss these. These are all pretty surface level, but there are clear throughputs to the original games. But let's go even deeper than that. Mechanically, these are things we know about Resident Evil, but why not show just a little bit more? Think about how progression works in the original Resident Evil. From the start, you're thrown into an environment that you're unfamiliar with. You have no sense of direction. You're lost. You came here with a purpose, but after being exposed to something that's so unreal and grotesque, you as a player feel incredibly helpless. Your supplies are limited, and the only thing you're worrying about now is survival. So carefully and methodically, you begin to explore. Room by room, you take in the scenery and see what each new place has to offer. Some may show malice, with monsters waiting around the corner to end your life prematurely, and some may show solace, giving you a quiet place to rest and contemplate what the next move is. As you discover more of your surroundings, you start to build that confidence in you as a player. You're conquering your fears as you move from place to place, and along the way, you gain some more ways to defend yourself from what's coming next. You may get smacked around a few times, and a few things you encounter may put a dent in your armor, but your journey as the player always progresses to being strong and fearless by the time the credits roll. By the time you're at the end of the game, you become a wrecking ball of destruction. Killing Yawn after he swallows your partner, Richard, is a satisfying feeling. Destroying the last remnants of Nemesis so he can no longer pursue you is always a huge sigh of relief. And Steve fucking dying will always put a smile on my face. Fuck you, Steve. All right? Fuck you. You're annoying. No one likes you. 7 is no different, and it follows this very distinct path for the player to experience. Ethan is given a purpose to find his missing wife after receiving a mysterious note of where to find her. Ethan witnesses the horror of the situation and is placed in an unfamiliar location with no sense of where to go and what to do. The house is a complete mystery, and in the beginning, it's very much about locating supplies to aid you on your adventure and to survive. You start with nothing, and you have to make do with what's given to you. As you progress, you get the lay of the land. You know what rooms need what key, your confidence is growing as your supply levels increase, and your experience in combat hardens you. You hit major roadblocks along the way, like Marguerite and Lucas, but they're just that. Roadblocks that you eventually overcome, and by the time you need to take care of the final boss, you're so stacked that you feel like that you're the one in control. This is the biggest motif that's conveyed through the series. 5 and 6 never conveyed this feeling all too well. While you do progressively get stronger as a player with better weapons and more health, you never feel like you as a player did anything. The game never stops to take a breath. You don't have time to feel stronger because the progress doesn't feel personal. You're constantly moving to the next objective or next mission. You feel like you're just getting stuff to keep going instead of feeling like you earned it. This feeling was something that was really important to the original games, and I'm super happy to see it make a comeback in 7. So when people ask me, hey Chris, what makes a Resident Evil game a full-fledged Resident Evil experience, I say this: progression and pacing. Now, this isn't to say that this is a carbon copy of what the originals were providing. Copy and pasting your past games' motifs and motivations can appease some fans, sure, but in the end, new ideas still need to come into play in order for this game to be viable and remembered long term. Capcom did a pretty good job in understanding that. Most of the ideas may have been taken from other game series, but, if it makes sense and you make it fit your overall design, then what's really the problem? Obvious stuff out of the way first.
Number 1, a new camera.
A new first-person camera. Some may say it's a ripoff of PT. I say it serves the gameplay. The game is more visceral, eerie, and malevolent when it's in your face. Corridors and hallways feel even smaller, and monsters feel more present as they're coming for you and not your player character. Plus, the change was also made for PSVR, so...
Number 2, crafting.
The originals sort of had crafting, as you could combine herbs to make stronger ones or combining and dismantling of key items, but in Resident Evil 7 it was fleshed out much further. Now, aside from crafting healing items, you're crafting ammunition, enhanced ammunition, and stimulants to help you progress. It's rudimentary, sure, as there's only 6 types of crafting materials in the world to find, but in the scope of the game, it makes sense. It would be a little strange to find nothing but healing items and tons of ammunition in a house without proper context. With crafting, it provides a balance of making sense within a world it's building, while also providing an extra layer of strategy.
Pro tip, always do the enhanced handgun ammo, thanks.
Number 3, the molded.
Continuing the theme of not zombies and not Resident Evil, we get a new enemy type known as the Molded. And at first glance, they look like more enhanced versions of the Regenerators from Resident Evil 4, but the similarities stop there. Their presence is felt throughout the house, as many parts are covered in the same stuff that they're made of, and their movement can be a little unpredictable. They spawn at locations while you're just moseying on through. There are multiple types of molded, like normal guy molded, spiky hand guy molded, doggy molded, and Fatboy 476. However, this is one of the few things I found disappointing in Resident Evil 7. Monsters and creatures from the RE series tend to be iconic. Resident Evil 2 had the Lickers, 3 had Nemesis, 4 had Vega's older, more maligned brother-in-law. The lack of variety was a little underwhelming for me. I appreciated the consistency of all the creatures as they all breed from the same virus that's applicable in this game. I just feel like that this is one area that creativity was a little lacking. Boss design made up for it a bit though. Capcom definitely took the time to find some new ways to make the series fresh again, and really the biggest strides was evolving the series naturally from what it was to what it needed to be for the future. As much as I want a new Resident Evil experience that's done from the ground up like yesteryear, I don't think it would be successful. I feel like as a fan, I would pick it apart for not being exactly like the Grandpa games. Unless this was remake territory, a lot of the ideas and concepts would be considered archaic in today's design world. The team saw what was happening in the survival horror / spoopy game ecosystem. There was sort of a revival. Amnesia, The Evil Within, Alien Isolation, Soma, Outlast, just a few examples of how the genre is still around. There's still a fan base for it, and it was evolving and growing into much more. Resident Evil was probably a major influence on all of these developers who created these survival horror titles. Now it was Resident Evil's turn to evolve, and they looked to their new form counterparts and sought inspiration from them. So what ended up happening was... Influence begets more influence, and everyone continues to grow towards new and better experiences. And Resident Evil 7 is no different. It took from its influences, mastered some new concepts, and passed the tests. Now understand, so far I've only been talking about the standalone title. The mainline Resident Evil experience is built from the ground up for the original fan at heart. It allowed for the fans to have a lot to grasp onto from the past while holding on for the ride into the future. In talking with some friends in the internet about 7 though, the people who were fans of the action subsection of Resident Evil didn't find this experience all that attractive. It was too slow, not exciting, bad pacing, etc., etc. I get it. It would be an impractical impossibility to be able to appease both sides of the spectrum. However much I disagree with them, it was a bold move on Capcom's part to sort of alienate the largest demographic they had. After all, we have to remember that 5 and 6 were the best-selling titles in the franchise. Now, sales do not equal quality, but it did garner a significantly larger outreach, and there are plenty of people who defend those titles as great games to this day. So why shaft them? Well, they didn't. Kinda. Not really. Sorta, yeah. Just let me explain. Much like every major title nowadays, we have season passes, DLC, and extra content that has to be paid for after the fact. And unfortunately, Resident Evil 7 does not buck this trend. I don't want to get into the conversation about DLC practices.
They're bullshit.
Or the reliance on season passes.
Also very much bullshit.
I want to discuss the content within the season pass. There were 3 chunks of DLC: Banned Footage Volume 1, Banned Footage Volume 2, and the Not a Hero End of Zoe DLC package. Volume 1 had game additions like Bedroom, where you play as Clancy from the VHS tapes in the main game as you try to escape from the, you guessed it, bedroom. It also contained Nightmare, a sort of single-player horde mode type game that focuses on survival over rounds and rounds of enemies. Finally, we have Ethan Must Die, which is essentially a pure hellish gauntlet of getting from point A to point B. Volume 2 had some more interesting takes with Daughters, this add-on adding some additional story beats before Ethan enters the picture, and honestly doesn't make any sense. 21, which you play a demented version of Blackjack, hoping to dear God you can hold on to all your little fingers. And probably the silliest thing this side of tofu I've seen in Resident Evil is Jack's 55th birthday. I mean, who doesn't love stuffing their face with cake? And look at their little hats! A few other add-ons showed up a millennia later with a pair of epilogues with Chris Redfield's return in Not a Hero and the Super Punch-Out adventures of Willie McBaker in End of Zoe. We can put aside a few of these pieces of content like 21, Jack's birthday, Bedroom, and Daughters, and let's focus on the ones that help me prove my point, like Not a Hero, Nightmare, and Willie's adventure through the bayou. Nightmare, like we discussed, is this sort of horde mode / shoot the thing before it hits you sort of minigame. Rounds and rounds and waves of enemies are after you as you fight to survive until dawn arrives. You can earn scrap as you kill molded and discover more rooms, growing your inventory with weapons and upgrades so you can take on harder and harder waves. As you survive, you get scores which allow you to unlock more abilities or weapons for you to use next time you play. Holy shit, this is just Mercenaries, isn't it? It's Mercenaries. This is Mercenaries reskin for Resident Evil 7. This was a mode that was introduced back in Resident Evil 3, but really began to flourish in 4 and 5. You had a list of characters to choose from, and you pick a location and go. Obviously, this version is a little neutered, as you can only play as Clancy, and it's only in the basement. You get the idea. But what it did was add a little strategy as the items you buy with the scrap increase in price to the point of it being prohibitively expensive, forcing you to use different items and weapons to succeed. Not a Hero was a short epilogue starring our boulder-punching leader Chris Redfield as he tries to chase down and capture Lucas Baker. This free update was faster, rowdier, deadlier, and overall more in your face than any update to this point. You have a sick arsenal at your disposal with super pistols, shotguns, and adding new abilities like well-timed counterattacks to allow you to keep the carnage up. It throws a lot at you with multiple enemy encounters and more intense final boss finale. Which, this boss fight brought me back to the days of fighting Birkin in Resident Evil 2. Not just from the look of the fight, but I mean, yeah. Look at him. Now look at Birkin. Look at this room. Now look at this room. Anyway, this mode was much more engaging from a combat perspective. You still had the ability to weigh your options and decide whether or not you wanted to engage in a scenario, but you also just had the ability to mow the fuck down anything and everything in your path. In some cases, you had no choice as the fight was brought to you. Now lastly, and certainly not least, was End of Zoe, a sort of cheeky last hurrah for the saga. In this, you take control of Joe, the never-mentioned or hinted-at brother of Jack Baker, after he discovers Zoe calcified in the swamp outside of the Baker home. I'm not exactly sure what Capcom was on or what they were thinking or what they were trying to accomplish with this one, but man, this one was fun. It was almost a self aware meme that the weapon of choice was your fists. It's almost as if they knew how stupid punching boulders were, so they looked at this and said, well, hey, you like that shit? What if you fucking punched alligators too? Or the Molan? Or Davy Jones's Cthulhu? Better yet, what if you fucking Batista bombed him? You like that, you fucks? Is that what you want? I can't say for sure that I wanted it, but I'm glad I got it. It was so bizarre and off the wall, but at the same time so viscerally satisfying to just punch the ever loving shit out of everything in front of me. It was primitive, but at the same time evoked some feelings that I have not had with a video game in such a long time. It was just dumb fun. And it didn't matter how this fit into the Resident Evil saga. And I think with these examples, there was a true focus of rounding out the experience for all Resident Evil fans. Not all of them are winners, but after having the main game really bring it home for the OG fans, it was cool of them to show that they weren't forgetting about everyone else. Content like Nightmares showed that they know how important mercenaries were to the later installations in the series. They knew how important and how fun it was to a lot of fans, including myself. They also understood that the pacing may be off-putting to a lot of fans, so they provided us with not a hero to spice it up, quicken the pace a little bit, and give us a ton of shit to shoot. And they knew how to be a hero by remembering how utterly ridiculous the series can be and just letting us punch the ever-loving heck out of everything in sight. And these were a big departure from what the main game had to offer, and show that the engine that they built isn't necessarily limited to one type of game that they started off with. At the end of it all, there's a little bit for everyone to enjoy. Now, if this is a game you haven't tried yet, or you have any interest in playing, I think now is the best time. Now that everything is here to be experienced, I'm sure that there is something within this package for you. Capcom was able to pull off some great things with the complete experience offered here, and I'm excited to see what direction they decide to take next. Because whenever it's here, it's probably going to have a little something here for all of us. So thanks for watching the first episode of Sirmans Sermons of 2018. I made a promise to myself to stick with this for the new year, and hopefully you guys will enjoy the commentary along the way. If you're a fan of this or anything else on the channel, please do hit that subscribe button and maybe check us out on Twitch if you're feeling a little saucy. Until next time, thanks again for stopping by, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Hopefully.